Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, body positivity, and health at every size. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified intuitive eating counselor specializing in weight-inclusive wellness. Join me as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beefing. Now I'm ready for the world, trying to sink my teeth in, stacking it.
Hey there, welcome to episode 98 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with Kylie Mitchell of the I'ma Eat That blog and a fellow body positive, health at every size dietitian. She's so cool. We have so much in common, and we had such a great far-ranging conversation about intuitive movement and healing your relationship with food and your body and pushing back against diet culture and some of the tips she has for recognizing and calling out diet culture whenever she sees it, and a whole lot more. It's a really great conversation. I can't wait to share it with you in just a minute. But first, I want to let you know about a couple great resources for helping you make peace with food. The first is my free quiz to assess if you have a healthy relationship with food, and I'll send you your results via email along with more than a dozen individualized tips to help you make peace with food wherever you may fall on the spectrum right now. You can take the quiz and get your results today at christyharrison.com/quiz. That's christyharrison.com/quiz. The second resource I want to share is my Intuitive Eating Fundamentals online course, which you can find at christyharrison.com/course. It's a 13-week course to help you improve your relationship with food and work through all the principles of intuitive eating in depth and really help troubleshoot some of the common areas where people tend to get stuck. I'll show you how to recognize the diet mentality even in its subtle forms and how to start substituting healthier thoughts instead. I'll share tips for making food and movement choices from a place of self-care rather than a place of self-control. I'll teach you how to navigate emotional eating and how to stop alternating between restricting and binging or restricting and overeating, and so much more. Participants have said it's really helped them learn the nuts and bolts of intuitive eating and make peace with food and change their lives for the better. One participant wrote me recently and said, I actually wanted to say that when I'm listening to your podcast, there are so many things I wish you'd talk about in addition to interviewing guests about their experience. It wasn't until I got into the course that I realized everything I wanted you to talk about was in the monthly Q&As. Lady, that's worth the price of admission. And if I had known, I might have bought the course sooner. Maybe you said it and I just wasn't listening very well, but you might consider emphasizing the monthly Q&A library that's available for people who want to hear more about the nuts and bolts of intuitive eating and health at every size. I think it's extremely valuable. Thank you for making the course and the work that you do. Very much needed in the world. And so, yeah, what she says is true, and I really haven't emphasized it enough. I do a monthly Q&A podcast for the course, and it's exclusively for course participants where I answer your questions about anything that comes up about intuitive eating and health at every size along the way. So not only is there self-paced content that you can engage with, walking you through each of the principles of intuitive eating in depth, but there's also this monthly Q&A so that any individualized questions that come up for you and helping you navigate intuitive eating, you can have answered. And I now have 11 of these, and they're each like an hour and a half long. So it's really a ton of content that you get exclusively by purchasing the course. There's also an exclusive private Facebook group for course participants where you can engage with people who are going through the course alongside you. And people have said that that's a really important aspect of the course for them too. Participant Julie says, I can't say how grateful I am that I found this course, Christy, and all the members who support me daily through our Facebook group. And participant MM says, the course helped give me a community to stay on track towards a shared goal, which is so, so important. So if you want to join this great community and get support on your journey to intuitive eating and making peace with food, plus a ton of exclusive content only available there and really extending on the themes that we discuss in this podcast, go to christyharrison.com/course and sign up today. That's christyharrison.com/course. Finally, if you like the podcast and you want to help us reach more people who need to hear the body positive message, you can leave us a great review on iTunes. Just open up iTunes on your computer or the podcast app on your phone, type in Food Psych to the search bar, Click on the result that comes up under podcasts and then go to the ratings and reviews tab, and you can leave your nice rating and review there telling us what you love about the podcast. I'm always so grateful to get these nice reviews. It totally makes my day when I read them. And they also help bring us up in the ratings so that more people can find these body positive messages. So the ratings and reviews you leave, and if you share the podcast on iTunes with your family and friends, that really helps too. So if you've already left a rating and review, thank you so much. You've made my day before already. And now you can share the podcast with family and friends by clicking on the little 3 dots next to the podcast name in iTunes and then clicking share podcast. And that will really help us get the word out to more people who need to hear these messages. And now, without any further ado, let's go talk to Kylie Mitchell. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
So I lived in a house where my parents and all my parents' friends were all very much in a diet mentality. And I think that's true for a lot of people, just how in our culture, dieting has become what everyone does. Recently, my little sister, she's in college and she was doing this project on cultural norms. And she was like trying to think of a cultural norm that she sees in America. And I was like, you should have done dieting because we don't even realize how ridiculous it is. So dieting always in my house growing up, my parents always had Slim Fast shakes in their fridge. Movement was never viewed as a joyful thing. Maybe some movement was, but it was always like you have to do a baseline movement that wasn't very joyful. I also had a grandpa who liked to make these comments about if you wear your hair back, you look thinner. And so getting, I know, right? Getting this message like really young that thin was good and thin was something I should be trying to achieve. And looking back, remembering like if my sister and I would get in an argument or a fight, I knew like the greatest insult I could say to her was, "You're fat," at like 8 years old. And I just think that's the weirdest thing now looking back, that I thought that was a bad thing at 8, so ingrained, so young.
Yeah, it really gets hold of kids so early. Like fat phobia is everywhere. It must be in the ether because, kids can really absorb it so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I remember my best friend, her grandma at one point sat her down and was like, this was like at age like 11, like, this is the time when you need to start taking care of your body. And by that, she meant like looking a certain way and being a certain size. And that's so hard for a kid who's 11 and, 11 to 14, you're supposed to gain a certain amount of weight. And that's a very vulnerable time for your body image to developing, your thoughts of yourself, and to have someone you love and respect say these things to you that you should be careful around your weight. It just sucks. It just really, really sucks.
Yeah. And it is so normal to gain weight at that time. So to pathologize it really sets people up for like a lifelong fight against their body sometimes.
Mm-hmm. I just wish there could be more people saying like, you just need to trust your body. And if you do that, like you're going to end up exactly where you need to end up. Like you don't have to micromanage it, kind of jumping around. But I have friends now who are pregnant. And so I kind of flip through some of their pregnancy books and the stuff that they say is just awful. Like now's not the time to sit around and gain all the weight you want. And it's just like, there's no mention of you can just trust your body and your body will gain how much weight it needs to gain. You can just listen to your hunger and fullness cues and your body's going to tell you what the baby needs. And I've just been so frustrated flipping through these books. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't handle this right now.
Oh, yeah. It's maddening because it's like these times when people are so vulnerable, your body's changing and it's meant to change. And like pregnancy it's a natural time for it to change. You have to gain weight. And to have that demonized is just so icky.
Yeah, I was at a conference recently and they were talking about how the quote, I forget who says it, but the quote was like, I don't want to live in a culture where we try to erase every sign of creating life. So we try to erase stretch marks, or we try to lose the weight after the baby. And I love that so much. Yeah, we shouldn't be trying to erase those things when our body just did this incredible, amazing thing.
I know. We should be celebrating them. We should be like, this is my battle scar. This is my, evidence that I've done something.
I absolutely agree. So back to growing up, for developing an eating disorder, like dieting and exercise are the two biggest risk factors, or two of the biggest risk factors. And I feel like I had dieting a lot in my life with the people around me. I had a sister who was not in a large, like she was just like a chubby kid. Like she was just growing out before she grew up. And I wish like that was talked about in our society. You have to grow out before you can grow taller. And so I feel like she wasn't put on a diet, but she started exercising not from a joyful place and started dieting more on her own. So being in this house in a world where dieting just happening all around me, not really falling into it until my freshman year of high school. My mom got pretty sick and ended up in the hospital in a coma. And I didn't know how to cope with it at the time. And the only thing I could think about doing was like going to food. And I remember like the day she went into the hospital, it was actually my birthday, and my best friend came over and she brought hummus and carrots and celery sticks. And when we were sitting there, like talking and kind of just watching TV, she was kind of just supporting me. I remember thinking, like, I wish she would leave so I could just go to the kitchen and eat a brownie right now and be alone. And looking back, that's the first time like I really wanted to go to food just to numb away and to cope with how I was feeling when I'm 14 and I didn't have these beautiful coping mechanisms that I have now for dealing with stress. And I agree with everything you say about emotional eating isn't the worst thing that we could be doing. I totally agree. Sometimes you eat a cupcake and it's fabulous and it's wonderful. You could be doing drugs or alcohol. That would be a way worse way to cope. Like eating a cupcake, not that big a deal.
Mm-mm.
But if it's your only coping mechanism, that's a problem. And at the time, it definitely was. And so in my mind, it's kind of fuzzy, but I remember like having that experience. And then I remember my sister going more towards restrictive dieting. In that time, my mom was in the hospital. And so I decided to do that as well. And eventually that restriction started leading to binge eating episodes. And I was terrified by that. The best way I can describe that is if anyone listening can hold their breath for as long as you possibly can. When you can't hold your breath any longer, you gasp for air. And that's the same thing that happens with food. You restrict for so long, and eventually you're going to gasp for food because you're trying to manipulate your instincts. And that's just not going to work long term.
Yeah, that's such a great metaphor. Or like I've heard also trying to hold in your urine, right? Or like anything where you're fighting against your body's natural instinct. We would think that's insane for something that wasn't about food, right? And then somehow with food, it's like, well, no, you've got to police yourself and watch it. And it's tantamount to saying like, just hold your breath and, your body will be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the holding your pee thing. I use that all the time with clients. I'm like, yeah, see how that goes. And that always gets a laugh.
Right.
But from there, the binge eating episodes were really crazy. And so I started compensating through excessive exercise for the binges and was stuck in a diet binge over exercise cycle for about 8 years. And that was super miserable. And that was during the time of my like undergrad nutrition program. And I have a lot of issues with my undergrad nutrition program. We never once were mentioned about intuitive eating or health at every size or a non-diet approach. And I just feel like one person coming in and mentioning any of those topics would have changed my life. One person coming in and saying, oh, here's a hunger and fullness scale, eat according to this. Like that would have like blown my mind. Like, oh, you can end up at the body you're meant to be and you don't have to try to micromanage it. Like what? But that never happened, which was so frustrating.
Did you decide to go into nutrition from a place of disorder in the first place? Do you think that's what kind of drew you to that major?
It's funny. I thought I was going to be a veterinarian and like help animals. And so I spent the first 3 years of college trying to get into vet school. And then when I didn't get in, I was like, do I want to apply again? And I feel like my moms in general, they just know things. And my mom's like, I don't think you want to do this, but I support you. And so eventually I decided to switch over to nutrition. But I thought I would have to fix my eating issues if I went into nutrition. And I wasn't willing to give up my coping mechanism for how I dealt with stress. I wasn't willing to give up the restriction and the binging and the overexercising. And I was like, if I'm doing this, I'm going to have to be healed. And so that scared me. And I think what was really scary for dietetic interns or people going into the nutrition field now, once I got there, I realized I could have my disorder because like half of my class is super disordered too. And all my teachers are on diets. And so that was like, oh, that was really not healthy for my eating disorder. It definitely pulled me farther into my eating disorder. And I feel like if I would have been in a different mindset, I could have used all the nutrition information I was learning as a tool to help myself take care of my body. But at the time, it was just a weapon to harm myself and to take me more and more into my eating disorder.
Mm-hmm. I totally identify with that. I was very much, my eating disorder was very similar, and I was in much the same place when I went back to school, maybe making an effort at recovering, but also kind of drawn to the field because I was like, ooh, maybe I'll lose weight if I know a lot about nutrition. Mm-hmm. And at first, it really played into that. The information I was getting, I was just filtering through that lens. And if there was anything that, was sort of more health at every size or intuitive eating oriented, I missed it because it was just what I was holding on to and absorbing was the diet messages. But thankfully, at some point, intuitive eating was mentioned or somebody like turned me on to it. And that really was a catalyst. But too many dietetic programs don't have any mention of that and are very diety, despite the sort of official party line from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics of all foods fit. It's like, but actually they don't in the life of many dietitians. It's like shocking how much restriction and demonization of particular foods there can be among dietitians.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I know I've heard like 1 in 3 nutrition students have some level of disordered eating. Mm-hmm. And then within the field, is it like 60% of dietitians have some kind of disordered eating?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard around the same number of people who work in the eating disorders field, 50 or 60% are recovered themselves. Although, of course, it may be higher because people don't always want to report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I talk about this a lot, how there's a spectrum of intuitive eater to disordered eating to eating disorder. And maybe, I don't know if it was ever the norm to be an intuitive eater, but now the norm is so disordered eating. So you really don't have to fall that far into more disorder to have a full-blown eating disorder. And so that's always like, really like one more step and you got a full-blown eating disorder. Many people walking around speak fluent eating disorder. College campuses speak fluent eating disorder. Everyone on there is talking in a way that encourages your eating disorder to keep going. And that's really hard. I heard it described like when you recover from or get treatment for panic attacks, you don't go back into a culture that says, have a panic attack again. Mm-hmm. But when you recover from an eating disorder, you go back into this culture that says, have your eating disorder again. Not to minimize panic attacks, because I've never actually had a panic attack and I'm sure they're awful, but it's tricky with eating disorders.
And that's what we mean when we say diet culture, right? Like it's a culture through which dieting is just woven like a fabric. It's everywhere you look, and messages we get about food and movement and body size and looks in general are so couched in the diet mentality that it's really hard to find messages that are outside of that. So yeah, it's a hard place to recover.
Yeah, my husband and I started doing this thing when I was recovering where anytime we heard like a diet mentality comment, whether we were at a restaurant, grocery store, holiday, family event, we would just like mutter under our breath to each other, like EDB, like eating disorder behavior. And so that was always really helpful to call it out for what it was. Like it might be, Aunt Susie or whatever saying some comment she thinks is harmless, but it like really can affect those with eating disorders. So just realizing when you see a EDB in your life.
Oh my God, I love that. That's such a great strategy because I'm always talking to people too about like separating from it and trying to notice this is a thought that I'm having. This is not me. This is not, I am not my thoughts. And to be able to say that really kind of helps put it in its place rather than getting sucked in and being like, oh, maybe I should try this, because it's so easy when you're not paying attention to have those messages bombard you and then be like, oh, maybe this is actually the way. You get sort of turned around, but you can kind of separate it from it in the moment. EDB. Mm-hmm. Love that.
Yeah, it's a fun one. So that was pretty much my relationship with food in childhood. And then it led me to an eating disorder.
Yeah. Did you get treatment at any point along the way or?
No, not like traditional treatment. I didn't. I saw a therapist. My mom's fine now, which is great.
Good.
But that was such a crazy time for our family that I think my parents, like, no one knows how to deal with that when you almost lose a parent and she's recovering still. And they put me in therapy, but I was young and I remember just not connecting with the therapist. I've never been a person who's really good at being in touch with my emotions, even still now. When I'm in therapy, it's been a hard thing for me. I know there's a term for that when you can't express your emotions. And I connect to that a lot. But I didn't get traditional treatment. At one point, when my weight was at a lower range, my mom was like, I'm going to take you out of school because this, whatever this is, it's not worth it. It's not worth you having to make yourself miserable. So we're just going to take a break for a while. And that scared me enough to start eating more. But that also led me into the more binging, compensating through exercise pathway.
Yeah. It really tends to morph so much even with treatment, I think people will often discontinue treatment too early and end up having eating disorders that morph, but especially when you're sort of doing it on your own and it's like, okay, well, I've given up that really restrictive behavior, so I must be fine. I remember thinking that too, like I was really extremely restrictive and then started the restrict binge over exercise cycle and then sort of like eased up a little bit, but, and I thought like, oh, now I'm not doing that intense restriction anymore, so I'm okay. But it wasn't. It was still disordered eating. Like you said, there's a spectrum that people fall on.
Yeah, that belief that it's like not that bad, which I always feel bad for people who live with just like mild disordered eating. I don't exactly know how to define mild disordered eating because I think it's pretty debilitating and miserable no matter what level. But they might not hit like rock bottom and they might not realize they need help. And it would be exhausting to have to live with that just your whole life thinking it was normal. And for me, I just got to the point where I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, why do I feel crazy about eating a cupcake at 3 p.m. for an afternoon snack? And I just really started deciding, it was after I got married, that it wasn't worth it anymore. And I would come across like positive affirmations that would really connect with me. And every Monday I would like have a new positive affirmation for myself, whether it was like, you're not less valuable if you take up more space in this world. And anytime a thought came in that like, you can't listen to your hunger, I would just be like, wait, like I am allowed to listen to my instincts. That is fine. And then eventually coming across the intuitive eating book, it was huge for me. I see it with clients all the time when they read that, and it really does change their life. It's just an approach that they just are like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know this even existed. And then I did an internship at an outpatient eating disorder private practice. And it was just so healing actually getting to talk to other dietitians about what I was struggling with, about what I had struggled with more severely in the past, just to be open and feel like I had a safe space. And I'd done a lot of recovery work, just like reading 8 Keys to Recovering from an Eating Disorder. And I think I read like every book I could get my hands on because I didn't want it anymore. It's hard on your marriage if you have to get up and run instead of make breakfast for your husband on a Saturday morning. Like it just sucks. And I didn't want it. And so I really just tried to find a new approach that didn't support having a diet mentality or having an eating disorder. And that was really when I found like health at every size and intuitive eating and a non-diet approach. And it changed my life. I love it. I feel like I immersed myself in it and still do because I find it so warm and comforting. And it's just such a good way to take care of yourself.
I agree. And it's such a good like bulwark to build against diet culture that surrounds us. Like I think we need to sort of have regular immersions in health at every size. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, because I feel like it gives people a space to come and like take a break from all that and also get rejuvenated and restored and sort of ready to go back out and fight it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I call it a bubble of coziness. And I make my clients make a list, and this podcast is always on the list because it's so incredible for people.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad. It's something I just started out of my own interest, back in the day. Like I was still in the final stages of my recovery. I mean, I was recovered behaviorally, but I still had some thoughts about body image and, negativity towards myself around my eating and stuff. And I think my interest was like talking to other people and feeling less alone and seeing what they went through with food, because I had this feeling from the work I had already done as a nutritionist that like everybody has some kind of food issue. And it's sort of amazing where it's led, because it started with that sort of more general concept of like, okay, everybody has some stuff with food. Let's talk about it, to like, here's disordered eating and eating disorders. And like, let's call that out specifically. And then here's the antidote, which is, body positivity and health at every size. But it's been a journey for me too, through that, to kind of immerse myself in the literature and in the movement to get to this place.
Absolutely. I feel like my blog has been a similar path for me. When I first started it, it was when I didn't get into vet school, like 2010, 2011. And I was trying to find something new. And I was like, well, I'm going to try food blogging. And at the time, it was pretty disordered. I was obsessed with food. It's like, oh yeah, let's do this thing where I can take pictures and edit photos and make the food look just fill people with cravings. It was very disordered. And the blog has shifted in a huge way from just a food blog to now a blog that's about non-diet mentality and about eating disorder recovery. And I still do food stuff, but how I do it now, when I post a recipe, like the serving size, something I realized when I was working with clients was like, if a serving size said you can only have enchilada, they were like, oh, I can't have more, like no matter what. And so now with my serving sizes, I'm like, you're allowed to listen to your hunger and fullness cues, or I always put like some like thing in there about that. Because like a lot of times serving sizes, like they're really randomly chosen. And it's just like, you can't use that. Like, of course you need to know how much your recipe makes, like 12 muffins or whatever. But like, you shouldn't be using that to dictate how much or how little you eat. And so I try to talk about food in that way. And I think that is a lot better. And it's really just writing the blog that would have helped me get out of my eating disorder. A lot of the healthy food blogs out there, they're very orthorexic and they make me uncomfortable. And even some of them that are talking about like a non-diet mentality or intuitive eating, but all their recipes are clean eating and their entire Instagram feed is of like, these bowls of vegetables.
Oh,
and that's
I know.
And I'm like, they're pretty, I guess, if you like that.
Right.
But I'm like, if I ate that, like I would be so constipated. Like that is way too much fiber for one person.
Yeah. And so unsatisfied too. I'd be like hangry all the time if that's all I ate.
Yes, exactly. Like let's include all the food groups. Like this is ridiculous.
I know.
I just think some of those blogs don't even realize the harm they're doing. Maybe some of those bloggers haven't struggled with disordered eating, but the things like when you're in the blogging community, the things you hear about these top bloggers who say they're vegan bloggers and then they have an intern who works for them that's like, they don't even eat like that. And I'm like, are you serious? Like they're ruining people's lives out there. And so I get pissed off about that.
That's interesting. I've never heard that, but that, makes complete sense. It's selling an image and it's selling an idea of what health is supposed to be. And nobody can really adhere to that without becoming extraordinarily disordered. Like we've had so many stories and examples of people like Jordan Younger of the balanced blonde, but it used to be the blonde vegan, going through that sort of coming out of like, I was actually had orthorexia and was super disordered about my eating. And this message that I've put out there has harmed me as well as other people. Mm-hmm. And there have been so many cases like that. But I guess the way to not have that happen is to like not do what you are preaching, not eat the way you say you're eating. But it unfortunately, it puts out an example for other people that is super harmful. And I think it's irresponsible of people to do blogs like that and Instagrams like that and stuff without considering the consequences. I was talking a few episodes ago with Katie Dalebout about the clean eating Instagrams and stuff. And we were saying like, it really is people's responsibility to show like a range of what they eat. Don't just post the vegetables, post like the pasta with, Parmesan and oil, post the meats or the proteins, and post all the cupcakes and fun foods you eat, and don't just post this narrow idea of what you're eating, because people are vulnerable. Like, people out there who are struggling and in diet culture are looking for an answer. And if they stumble on this and it seems like you have this bright, shiny life that they want, and you're eating only plates of colorful vegetables, people are going to be tempted to try that.
Mm-hmm. And it's tough. And I understand, like, in the blogging world, you can make a lot of money if every recipe you post has the words clean eating, vegan, or gluten-free in the title. And so I feel like sometimes people sell out for the money. Like, they don't realize the harm that they are causing. Because I even thought, like, if I had the word clean eating in every single one of my recipes, like, I know I'd have more traffic. I know Pinterest would send me more referrals. Like, but it's not worth it, because that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to ruin people's lives, but it's so frustrating to me, because I just know the impact certain healthy living blogs had on me, the negative impact when I was in my eating disorder. And so I wish they could realize that. I really do. It's tough.
Yeah. How did you go from, following those blogs to how did blogging play a role in your own recovery?
Yeah, I tell my clients, like, I don't know when their eating disorder started or when it will end. And so I feel like for me, it's the same. It was this very, like, gradual transition away from the strict food blogging. At some point I realized, like, it wasn't, I didn't know why I was doing it. It didn't seem healthy anymore just to be posting recipes. And as I started having a diet that was more a diet, just the way I'm eating, be more inclusive of all foods, and there wasn't any restriction, I didn't really want to talk about food all the time anymore. And I just saw that shift happen naturally, where it's like, I don't want to post 5 recipes a week. I'm eating everything. I don't have to lay in bed at night and think about food, because, like, I'm satisfying my body with everything it wants during the day. And it just wasn't as fun for me to think about. Like, I still love creating things in the kitchen, and I think it's such a good self-care thing for me, but it's occasionally. It's not 5 recipes a week kind of thing. And so slowly, as I started to learn these things that were helping me live a better life, I wanted to share them with my readers. I get frustrated with some food blogs when, they are editing these photos to make the food look more delicious than maybe it is. And then they don't tell people, like, how to feel normal around food and not feel obsessive or crazy, or that they can or can't have it. And so I really wanted to be a balance of yummy food, but also, like, how to have a normal and healthy relationship with food and exercise. And so I wanted to find that balance. And so as I journeyed through this, the blog journeyed through it as well. And I'm very, like, open with my readers and saying, like, I know I probably made some eating disorders worse in the beginning, but, like, now, like, we're not doing that anymore. And I hope I'm helping. I know I'm helping people, because just the sweet emails you get and everything, it's heartwarming, and I love it.
Yeah, you're doing amazing stuff. And I really think it's such a cool and unique niche that you're in, of showing delicious food and sharing what you eat. And as a dietitian too, being like, here's my afternoon snack cupcake, or here's the burger I ate, or, you're sharing so many interesting foods that I think the general public is kind of like, dietitians eat, these plates of vegetables, and you're, like, blowing up the expectations around that. And then also including, like, messages specifically about that. I think it's really powerful.
Thank you. I like it. I think your job as a dietitian in the media, if you're in this, well, really any dietitian in the media, their job is supposed to be a model of flexibility and variety with food and exercise. And I really hope that I am being a model. I mean, a lot of my clients, when they come in, like, the amount of food I recommend that they should be eating, which is the normal amount, they feel like no one in their life has ever eaten that much food. And so me showing people that, like, yes, like, you can eat 3 meals and 3 snacks, and that is fine. And that might be what feels good in your body, and you should do that.
Yeah.
That just kind of blows their mind, I think. And I don't know, I still get emails from, like, dietitians who are angry with me. And those are always hard, because I feel like they're in some level of disorder and maybe they're trying to figure it out. So I try to respond in a kind way. But I did a post on, like not feeling so crazy around simple carbs and how like simple carbs can be a great food to help you take care of your body. If you're at a restaurant and it's 30 minutes before the meal or you're going to actually eat and you're hungry in that moment, it's like a basket of simple carbs, bread on the table. It can be perfect to eat because simple carbs, they spike your blood sugar and then they let it come down again. And then by the time your meal comes out, you're hungry. And it's perfect. Like we don't have to feel crazy around like simple processed carbs. We can just use them for when our body says we need them or they sound good or tasty.
That's so interesting too, like thinking about the basket of bread culturally. It's like that has evolved as a part of culinary culture in many cuisines around the world independently. Like it's because I think that people's bodies feel good when they eat that way. And simple carbs are part of cuisines around the world, not even just, the basket of bread, but like white rice or corn or, things that are like considered in our clean eating culture now, like considered scary and a lot of people's fear foods. But like these things have millennia of history of being part of human culture around the world in different places. And it's not like everybody is dying because they're eating this stuff, it's actually helping people thrive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that just reminds me of like the whole good and bad food debate and just how like simple carbs are deemed as a bad food. And it's funny to me because my reasoning for there not being any good or bad foods is that all food is protein, carbs, and fat. And whatever food you can throw at me, like it's going to fit into one of those categories. So we really don't need to feel insane around it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all the building blocks of life. It's like what we are made of.
Yeah.
And what helps us run, what helps, fuel us, but also gives us pleasure. Yeah, we don't need to demonize foods. And I think it's interesting sort of the history of that within dietetics. There's this all foods fit message, which again is like the official party line and has been criticized for being the official party line because I remember when I was back in my orthorexia days, considering going back to school to be a dietitian, I was like, all Foods Fit is a cover for soda sponsors, the like big soda companies sponsor the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics conference. And, they have to say all foods fit because they're like taking money from these big companies. Like it got twisted in my mind as like a bad thing. But I've actually found, as I recovered and also becoming a dietitian and sort of seeing behind the scenes a little more of how things work in the academy. It's like, I don't think actually that message is embraced at all by most dietitians. I don't think all foods fit is really taken into practice in the way that it should be. And I think it's actually great that that's the official party line, not because of, soda sponsoring whatever, but because that's how we need to approach food to not feel crazy around it. Because if we start thinking of foods as good and bad and putting them into these categories, it holds too much power and we start having reactions and binging on things that were restricted and then feeling guilty about it, or just eating them and feeling guilty about it, not even binging, And I think a healthy relationship with food is something that needs to be in the forefront of the nutrition world. And it just isn't at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I've never connected to that term all foods fit. And I don't know why, because it's something I believe. Like, yeah, of course. But when I see that term, like even in people's like bios, I'm just like, I never saw that being embraced. I always saw people saying that, but never actually acting on it. And so I never connected to that term. I connect with like non-diet approach, health at every size, intuitive eating, which all mean all foods fit practically, way more than that term. And maybe because it was promoted by the academy and I never actually saw it being acted on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a hollow promise. It does kind of ring hollow in a way. And also, yeah, I think, I've seen dietitians who walk the line, like who have one foot in diet culture, but one foot in like eating disorder recovery practice, embracing that term as well. And it sometimes feels like that's language of a particular subset of our population. Like to really be firmly rooted in intuitive eating and health at every size and non-diet culture, it's sort of more radical language, maybe.
Yeah, because I usually think if you know about intuitive eating, health at every size, you've done research and you've looked into it and you've spent time. You're not just saying all foods fit. Like Okay, what does that mean?
Right. All foods fit. And then, oh, but be scared of these foods over here,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how did you sort of come to do that research and dig into the health at every size model?
I think I just came across it and it sounded so right. It just sounded like a way for me to take care of myself that sounded like I could flow, if that makes sense, with my hunger and fullness, with my cravings. Like it just sounded like that's how our bodies are supposed to work. And just reading intuitive eating and seeing like how dieting was talked about and how like it's dieting's fault that I feel crazy around food and it's not that I'm failing, and seeing how intuitive eating talked about intuitive movement. That was all so helpful for me because so much of my life I spent hearing how good exercise is for you. And I recently watched a webinar and it resonated with me so much. It was talking about how for some, exercise is like a peanut allergy. So, peanut butter, excellent food for so many people. The example was there's this program that brought jars of peanut butter to third world countries, and it helped a lot of kids who are malnourished like get some food in them. And it's great, except if you have a peanut butter allergy or you have a peanut allergy. And for me, that's really how I felt about exercise. For some who have that obsessive compulsive nature with exercise, it's not good for them at all. And that was really hard when everywhere you look, it's talking about how like you have to exercise a certain amount. And with intuitive eating and health at every size, it was like you can move your body in a way that feels good and that's okay. Like you don't have to do more than that. And I really liked that because I was so sure in my eating disorder that like I had to do exercise for stress relief. It was the way that I was going to decrease anxiety and cope with stress. But I never realized that after a run, I never felt calmer. Like maybe for like 10 minutes because of endorphins, but then like I still had all the stress. And so starting to realize that my obsessive exercise tendencies, they were avoidance techniques. They weren't actually techniques that helped me improve my mood. They never made me feel calm. And so I always felt like, well, now looking back, not then, but just like running, it was a way for me to move my body faster than my brain so I could numb out. It was just another form of numbing, whether it was overeating, some overeat to numb out, and I really believe some overexercise to numb out because you don't have to feel anything. And then you finish and your brain is still just so anxious. And so for me, like reading about health at every size and the idea that you could find movement that was joyful to you, I loved it. I loved it so much. And it led me to find yoga, which started to allow me to become comfortable with sensations. And it allowed me to sit with discomfort without reacting. And it gave me space to just sit and be without trying to change anything. And yoga was just incredible for my healing journey and eventually getting to the place where in Savasana, I could like put my hands on my belly and feel my belly expand and deflate without having to remove my hands because it was so uncomfortable. And for some, like, that's not a good idea right now. Don't put your hands on your belly. Like in eating disorders, the belly is such a vulnerable area that like you don't want to touch and you want to dissociate from. But yoga eventually allowed me to get to the place where I could embody every single part of me. And my belly, I think, was the last place just to be like okay with the size that it is on that day.
I love that. That's, I think, such a beautiful thing to aspire to. And yoga really does provide that connection in a way that compensatory exercise or instrumental exercise doesn't afford, which I think is why like a lot of people ask me for resources on movement. And, you know, people will say like, I really like weightlifting or I really like aerobics classes or gym-based activities. Do you know of any gyms that are body positive? And it's growing. There is a movement of that is growing. So, you know, there are some resources available. But I think that the reason most resources that are available around body positive, weight neutral movement are yoga, basically, is that yoga is sort of a bridge into relating to movement differently, relating to movement in a more intuitive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm in Houston, Texas, and we have 2 yoga studios that don't have mirrors. And I think that's been really healing for me as well, and really helps me focus on my body and how I'm feeling, and not on the random girl in the back of the class that's practically wearing a bikini. And you're like, why are you wearing that? So I can focus on me, which is what I should be doing when I should be getting out of my head and into my body more.
Yeah, yeah. And I think yoga too, like even yoga classes that aren't explicitly geared towards health at every size, I think the message that most yoga teachers try to embrace is like, this is a place of non-competitiveness. We're not here to push ourselves to meet any goal. Like wherever your body is today is where it is, and try to accept that. And, don't look at the person down the line and being like, oh, they're so flexible, I'm nothing, or, whatever comparison you're going to make in your head, because it's not about that. Like the practice is just you connecting with your body, and it looks however it looks.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like there could be a lot of parallels between like yoga and recovery. Like yoga, it's this journey to connecting with yourself. And I feel like recovery from disordered eating or eating disorders, it's this journey of bringing you closer and closer to who you're meant to be. And my favorite way to like talk about recovery is when like Michelangelo was sculpting the David, something that Michelangelo was quoted saying was that David was always there. I was just chipping away at what wasn't David. And so I feel like that's true for eating disorders, and even like yoga. Like it's a tool to help you chip away at what isn't you. What is your eating disorder, or what is unhelpful thoughts. I think Rebecca Scritchfield calls them like thought bullies, like chipping away at those. And so I so love that. And I think yoga can be so healing for so much. And just like God is helping you chip away at what isn't actually you. And once all of that is chipped away, like you're recovered.
That's a really wonderful way of looking at it. Because, yeah, I think it's like we have so much that we take on from outside, from diet culture, that isn't us, that gets integrated and that feels like us, but it's actually a separate voice or a separate, it's not coming from our core self. But we all have intuition. I think sometimes it's interesting with intuitive eating and eating disorder recovery. There's this tricky point where if someone's engaging in eating disorder behaviors regularly, they're not ready for intuitive eating yet. Like their body is not sending them the appropriate signals, or the signals that are driving them towards what actually will be nourishing for them. So people sometimes ask me when they're in that space, like, well, does that mean my intuition is broken? Or like, will I ever get it back? And it's like, it never goes away. I don't think it ever is broken. It's just your physical cues might be off, but your intuition is still there. And maybe tuning into it in arenas other than food is a place to start being able to listen to it and honor it. Even if your body isn't sort of there yet, in being able to be a part of the intuition equation. Like you can listen to and honor it regarding movement and like what might feel good. You can listen to and honor it, or like in rest too. I always say like rest is a part of intuitive movement. Just like we have hunger and fullness, we have movement and rest, and desires for both of those.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think people forget how important rest or sleep truly is for health. I really think adequate sleep needs to come before eating vegetables. Like I so do. I think it's so important. And like stress levels, if you're a highly anxious, stressed out person, like that's really hard on your health too. And like finding a therapist you can talk to, and just tapping into that intuition, knowing when you need help, when you need to take a break. And I see all the time with clients who come in and they want intuitive eating immediately, and it's just like, yes, like we're going to get you there, but it's going to take a little while. And sometimes that's where meal plans can be helpful. And I know that can be confusing for a lot of clients, but it's just like they can be a really good bridge to intuitive eating. There's no form of intuitive eating that involves a meal plan, but it can help you realize how to eat again when diet culture has tricked you and manipulated you and gotten you really off base of how you should be eating. Meal plans can be really healing.
Yeah, I think Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch say it's like a cast. Like if you break your arm, you have to be in a cast first. The meal plan is like the cast. And then eventually you get to physical therapy and then finally full movement of your arm. And it's like, intuitive eating, learning the process of intuitive eating is the physical therapy. Full movement is like the full expression and living in intuitive eating. And I think that's so true that like we can't really expect to jump from breaking our arm to like moving it fully again. We have to take some time to relearn and rest. And in diet culture, we are told like we shouldn't be eating as much as we're hungry for. That's one of the key messages of diet culture. So yeah, a meal plan can be so helpful in learning like actually your body's probably going to need food at this time and this time and this time and this time and this time throughout the day. And that's normal. Like when you are finally back in touch with those cues, you'll notice those subtle shifts in your energy. You'll notice subtler levels of hunger than you're probably used to when you're in that diet, binge, restrict, overexercise, or compensation cycle. Or when you're just binging and then you're just not hungry for a long time and then it sort of sets you up again for a binge.
Absolutely. I know one of like the greatest things I started to do with recovery was like every morning I'd get up, I'd have positive affirmations that I would read about like my body or about eating. And then I'd set the intention of like, today I'm going to listen to my fullness cue or my hunger cue. I'm not going to restrict. I'm going to listen to my hunger cue and I'm going to listen to my fullness cue and I'm going to listen to my craving cue. And whatever happens to my body, I'm going to tolerate it right now. And just knowing like where I was then and like where I am now in this place where there is a lot of body acceptance and knowing like my body's going to change throughout life and that's okay. That doesn't mean anything about me as a person. But in the beginning, listening to those hunger and fullness cues and like tolerating it if your body does change, because it probably will. Like with intuitive eating, like I gained weight. And I feel like there are people who, I get emails all the time, people who are like, I wasn't using intuitive eating for weight loss, but I really thought I would lose weight. It's just like, then you were using it.
Right.
But I know it's tricky. Like they're trying a different approach and they want it. And it's just like sitting with some of the discomfort of your body changing and knowing you might have to buy bigger clothes. And that's okay, but it can take practice to be okay in this body. And again, for me, positive affirmations were huge. Having a Pinterest board that is a health at every size, body positivity Pinterest board where I can just pin positive affirmations and have like go-to quotes. And now I just have them all memorized if I'm having like a tough body image day. And now my tough body image days, like I realize body image is external representation of an internal struggle that I can't quite process through. So when I'm having a really bad day and I'm like, I can't express these feelings, it's really easy to blame my body. And now I realize my brain goes there. And so I'm like, okay, yes, that's not the problem. But thanks for trying to take care of us by saying it's my body's fault. And then understanding that. And now something that's really helpful is like making a list of things that actually matter, a list of 3 things that I want to accomplish in my life or in that day and focusing on them, not focusing on like your thoughts trying to blame your body for you not being able to do something. It's just like, I'm going to make a list of things I want to get done and work on those rather than sit here and wallow. Not that, I mean, sometimes you need to rest, but making a list of things you can focus on that actually matter.
Yeah, to take you out and give you some perspective that your body is not the most important thing in the world, like that you have other purpose in life.
Absolutely.
I was like, when you were saying body acceptance, you were working on body acceptance through weight gain. It made me think that I've been meaning to say this more in the podcast because I have someone who asked me recently, like, is health at every size for me too, even though I'm in a very large body? And yes, like health at every size and this body acceptance work is for everyone of every size. And I think that body dissatisfaction in our culture really stems from fat phobia that's instilled in all of us from a young age. And so people who are in thinner bodies or smaller bodies per societal standards don't get the outside stigma that people in larger bodies get, but we all have like the inside stigma of thinking our bodies aren't good enough. And so I think you were saying, Pinterest boards and like body positive sort of immersing yourself in the body positive world, I think can be so healing because you can really see people of diverse body sizes and people, in sizes that are larger, living a good life, being happy, being fulfilled, kind of having a visual representation of that, and also a visual representation that just changes your standard of beauty over time. If you immerse yourself and keep looking at those images, it really will shift what you find beautiful and what you sort of habitually denigrate about people's bodies. And I think that's such an important aspect of body acceptance and eventual body positivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I've had people email me about intuitive eating actually and be like, I'm in a larger body, but I feel like intuitive eating is only for people in thinner bodies. And I'm like, wait, no, like you not embracing intuitive eating is probably going to keep you stuck. And so it's just such a good tool for helping you get out of that diet mentality. And it is meant for everyone. And I really like what you said about while people in like, I think this is what you said, people in smaller bodies, they might not have that external stigma of, because they don't have as much fat on their bodies, they might not have that external stigma that like the fat phobic culture gives, but they still can have that internal stigma of thinking their body is not good enough. And this might be something more for the dietitians who are listening, but I've had clients who are like, well, like you don't know how I'm feeling because you are in the body that you are in and you look fine. And like in the beginning of working in private practice, that always really hurt me. And I had to go see a therapist, and I get supervision a lot from other dietitians who've been in this field longer than me.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, it's so helpful and so great at building confidence. And I use Marcy Evans right now for supervision.
Oh, nice.
And she's excellent.
I love Marcy.
Yeah, she's really great. And so it's just realizing like the things that clients are saying, how they're affecting you, and knowing like, yeah, maybe I'm in a body that society doesn't reject, but there's still that like internal stigma that I had to work through of saying like my body wasn't good enough. And so no matter what like shape or size you are, it can always be a struggle of accepting your body. But like I agree that like health at every size and intuitive eating is so much for everyone, no matter what your body size is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's such a good practice to acknowledge that and sort of have those tough discussions with clients, because it is like messy and weird to have to talk about bodies, and to be someone who is in a smaller body doing health at every size work. Sometimes people do perceive it as like, well, what would you know about this or whatever? But I think this dialogue is important for people of all sizes, and also for people in smaller bodies who maybe don't have the external stigma and therefore have more cultural privilege to be centering these conversations and, giving voice to people who might be more marginalized. Like, I think that's a really important aspect of our work too.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah. I was curious, going back to earlier, you were saying that your husband, you were already married to your husband while you were in recovery. And I'm just curious how that looked, like how that affected your relationship and how your marriage evolved as you went through recovery.
So I wasn't willing to let my relationship with my husband suffer because I was choosing my relationship with my disordered eating. And so I knew if I, couldn't go out to eat with my husband on a Friday night because of my disordered eating or eating disorder, that wasn't going to be okay. And eating disorders, they're so sneaky. And I don't think people who have eating disorders are liars. I just think they exclude things from the conversation sometimes. And so you just have to ask the right questions. And so if you're not asking the right questions, they're just not going to tell you because you didn't ask. And so with me and my husband, he has always been really good at giving me these like self-esteem boosts that have nothing to do with my body size. I really like building a business. I really like the blog, and I really like having my own private practice now. And a lot of the self-esteem boosts, they were like not only related to business and your accomplishments, but like those were better self-esteem boosts than saying you look really good in that shirt or something like that. And so going from a place of feeling like the world judges you for your body to a husband who is really encouraging of, I don't want to say the things I was doing because he likes my character too, and just as I am, but it was really helpful for me just having him give me these self-esteem boosts that didn't have anything to do with my body size or my running or my exercise routine. And he's a very normal eater, which I think is so great if people in recovery can be around someone who's very normal with eating behaviors and don't have any good or bad foods and will eat fast food because it's the option or just because it sounds good and have no guilt about it, and who has never dieted in their life and knows that their body size doesn't make them more or less valuable. It was just like really helpful and healing for me to be around that nonstop. And a lot of his help came from just supporting me in whatever I needed. When I ended up taking about 4 months off of all exercise towards the beginning of our marriage. And that was, I say it's the hardest thing I ever did because I really think it was. I really feel like I went through a grieving process of having to let go of running. And like what my movement looked like then is I would lay on a yoga mat in our backyard in the afternoon after work and put my hands on my stomach and just like kind of tolerate that. And him just maybe not totally understanding what I was going through because he's never had an eating disorder, but just being able to be like, I'm here for you and I'm not going anywhere. That was really great for me. And like looking back, like in the moment, I don't know if I realized how hard of a time I was going through at the beginning of marriage, but it was really good knowing like I had his support and his love and knowing like he's not going anywhere. Like he's going to be here and we're going to work through this. And if I need more support, we'll get a therapist. And I did get a therapist, which has also been really helpful. So just having him support me, and if he doesn't know what to say or what to do, like that's okay. Just having him here to love me.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think it's possible for anyone to find that too. You know, it's like if you're single looking for that, you know, seeking out someone who has those qualities. And if you're in a relationship working to get to that place where, you know, someone can support you and provide space for you to do the recovery work. And also like friends can provide that too, I think, to some extent, right? Finding friends to surround yourself with that have good relationships with food and can sort of model a different way, and model also that they love you no matter what and that they love you for reasons other than your body. Because that's really, I mean, when you think about it too, like an exercise that is often given in like eating disorder treatment centers of, you know, think about your closest people in your life, the people you love the most. What do you love about them? Why do you love them? Does it have anything to do with how they look? Does it have anything to do with their size and shape of their body or how much they exercise or how much they eat? Like, of course not. It really is never the case that the people that are most important to you are important for those reasons. It's always for deeper reasons.
Yeah.
Finding people who can sort of reinforce that is so key. I was actually fully recovered by the time I met my fiance, but when I was going through my recovery years ago, I dated a guy who was a food writer, and that was really a huge inspiration and sort of biggest, you know, first step of my healing too, was having someone around me who was a more normal eater and had a flexible relationship with food and could go out to dinner and enjoy himself and not talk about what he was going to have to do to work it off or sort of, you know, any disordered compensatory behaviors. It was like, okay, so this is possible and I'm going to eat this way with this person. And it was such a gift, you know. And I later started doing, when I was first working in the eating disorder field, I was doing meal support therapy where I would go out to dinner with clients and, you know, or lunch or whatever meal and like eat with them and basically sort of provide that same modeling for them that I had provided for me too. So that's actually a thing that you can like get. You can get a meal support therapist to model that for you too, which is so cool. It's like a resource that a lot of people don't know exists, but.
Oh yeah, meal support can be so healing. I agree. And in the beginning, like you were talking about when you were eating with that past relationship you were in, just like, yeah, I'm going to go out and I'm going to just eat this. It's kind of like a fake it till you make it. It's kind of like, I'm going to do this. It feels uncomfortable and wrong, but I'm going to tolerate it. And if I need to go see a movie after so I can kind of distract myself, we're going to do that too. So just knowing it can be hard, but like, I really think you just have to sit with the anxiety sometimes. You have to tolerate the anxiety, and the anxiety of eating a hamburger will start to come down on its own. The brain gets bored. The brain is not going to make you feel crazy every time you eat a hamburger if you're doing it regularly.
Yeah, you'll show yourself that there's nothing to fear. You kind of challenge the fear every time you do it. It's exposure therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's why, an aspect of eating disorder recovery that's always so important is like breaking out of ruts and not just eating the same foods all the time, but challenging yourself to eat things that were scary to you, and just showing yourself like, it's okay. Nothing bad actually happens if I do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can actually eat the foods I enjoy and my taste buds like God gave us taste buds. Like, let's use them.
Totally. I know. Well, I mean, that's a good segue into talking a little more about your blog and your online work, because I love your Instagram and stuff too. So tell us where people can find that and just a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, so I am an outpatient eating disorder dietitian in Houston, Texas. I have a private practice there where I see clients virtually. And in Houston, I was at another private practice. I had an incredible mentor for the last 2 years and just finally made the shift to have my own private practice, which is called I'm Eat That Nutrition Counseling, which is an exciting step. I also write the blog, which is I'mAEatThat.com. And my Instagram account is just I'mAEatThat.
It's so good and inspirational. And I'm going to put links to all that stuff in the show notes too, so people can find it.
Perfect.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kylie. It's really a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. This was good. I had to keep reminding myself that because I listened to the podcast so much that I was actually on the podcast. So I was like, you're not like in your home just listening to another food like episode. Like, you need to respond. Yeah. So your voice is like so soothing to me because I've listened to so much. So I was like, respond. You're not, this is recorded.
I love it. Well, thank you for being such a dedicated listener, and I love your work too. So everybody should totally go check it out.
Good stuff. Thanks, Christy.
Thanks, Kylie. So that's our show. Thanks again so much to our guests for being here and to you guys for listening. And we'll be back again next week with another brand new episode. Meanwhile, I'd love to stay in touch. And the best way to do that is via email. So you can go to christyharrison.com/email to sign up for my VIP list. I'll send you info about new episodes of the podcast as they drop, as well as exclusive sneak previews of new episodes, giveaways and other special deals on the products and services I offer, special tips on how to make peace with food and learn to trust your body, and a whole lot more. Sign up at christyharrison.com/email. You can also subscribe via iTunes and leave us a nice rating and review, which is a great way to get the word out about the podcast and help other people find these important messages. Just go to iTunes from your computer or your podcasts app, type in Food Psych to the search bar, click on the result that comes up under podcasts, and then click on ratings and reviews, and you can leave a rating and review right there. And I really appreciate all the 5-star reviews and wonderful ratings that we've gotten, because it's helped us climb really high right now in the rankings. And that's really cool because we're competing against some of the weight management and body shaming types of messages that I'm trying to fight with this podcast. So we've really started to beat out a lot of the diety voices, and I'd love to continue climbing higher in the rankings to get this message out even further. So please leave us a nice rating and review. It's so very much appreciated. And thanks to everyone who's left reviews so far. The music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there in that perfect position now?